From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Thursday, March 7th, and here are today's headlines. 28% of registered Vermont voters cast ballots on town meeting day. The electorate combined to vote down about a third of all school budget proposals in the state. That's an historically high number. And Secretary of State Sarah Copeland-Hansis says the unusually high number of budget failures likely reflects unease among voters.
The number of school budgets that didn't pass yesterday really seems to be an indicator that Vermonters are very worried about rising property taxes.
Budgets were rejected in 29 districts, including Barre, Champlain Islands, Fairfax, Kingdom East, Missisquoi Valley, Montpelier, Roxbury, Otter Valley, South Burlington, Springfield, and St. Johnsbury. Overall turnout on Tuesday was relatively low compared to the past two presidential primaries. But the number of Vermonters who participated in the Republican primary was higher than it's been in at least 20 years. And that higher than normal Republican primary turnout, aided by Vermont's open primary system, helped former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley win the GOP presidential primary on Tuesday. Vermont voters are allowed to choose which party's primary they would like to vote in. At a Haley rally last Sunday, Governor Phil Scott encouraged Democrats and independents to take a GOP ballot to support her. Matt Dickinson is a political science professor at Middlebury College, and he says an analysis of the towns that Haley won shows she did well in the traditionally Democratic areas of Vermont. She also attracted many independent voters, giving her a big boost.
I think it did. And she also, in her one rally here, reached out to voters in the Democratic Party, basically saying that Donald Trump and Joe Biden is no choice at all.
Despite the win in Vermont, Haley dropped out of the race yesterday. Vermont was the only state primary she won during her campaign. Several Vermont towns passed resolutions on town meeting day calling for a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel in the war in Gaza. Towns voting for the ceasefire included Richmond, Thetford, Marshfield, and Newfane. But that was not the case in a floor vote held Tuesday in Highgate.
A resolution to have an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and have the federal government cease funding to the Israelis. All in favor of this resolution? Opposed? No. Resolution passed.
The decision came during Highgate's last floor vote on town meeting day. Residents opted to switch to voting by Australian ballot in a close vote, 79 in favor with 69 opposed. Barre Opera House Executive Director Kurt Thoma is leaving after less than 1 year in the role. Thoma's last day will be March 21st. He told 7 Days he's leaving to support his stepdaughter, who is dealing with medical issues. Thoma replaced longtime director Dan Casey in May of 2023. Before this position, he was the director of Chandler Center for the Arts in Randolph and held multiple roles at Burlington's Integrated Arts Academy. In an announcement, Barre Opera House leaders said they're preparing a search for Thoma's replacement. Norovirus cases are on the rise in the Northeast. It's a highly contagious stomach bug that leads to sudden onset vomiting and diarrhea. Dr. Tim Leahy is an infectious disease physician at the University of Vermont Medical Center. Yesterday, on Vermont Edition, he said cases do seem to be going up in the region, but the current numbers are also typical for this time of year.
What is important for everybody to do is to use good hand hygiene. We realized in the COVID pandemic that we were overemphasizing hand hygiene, that it was about the air. But for norovirus, it's all about washing your hands and your bathroom so that the next person near you or in that space doesn't pick it up.
Hydrating is the most important step to recovery from norovirus. Coming up, the clock is ticking for towns deciding how to spend federal funding they received for development and housing projects. The latest on those discussions from town meeting day after this.
The Frequency is supported by MVP Healthcare, offering Medicare Advantage plans made for Vermont and guided by doctors. In partnership with the UVM Health Network. Info at uvmhealthadvantage.com.
There was a lot of talk around the state about development and housing during town meeting day. Towns that received money through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, have to decide how to spend it before the end of this year. So there were votes held across the state on town meeting day on pending projects. To bring us up to date on how some of these debates and votes went on Tuesday, Vermont Public's Howard Weiss-Tisman spoke with host Mary Angish.
Howard, I understand that you spent town meeting day in Londonderry in Windham County. First off, tell us what you were following there and How did things go?
Yeah, so Londonderry had a bond vote on their town meeting day warning. They have actually 2 wastewater systems they want to build in the south and the north ends of town. It's an almost $8 million project that supporters say will encourage development in the 2 villages. I saw Sharon Crossman. She was standing out in front of Town Hall talking to the people about the project, and this is what she told me why she supported it.
We can't improve our village centers without them having what it needs to continue, including wastewater. It affects everything. It affects private property owners. It affects business owners. It affects people who live near the rivers that are polluted. It's a big nut. It's a big nut, but it's the critical one.
The town got most of the money from the state's ARPA fund. ARPA, as we said, is American Rescue Plan Act. That's some of the COVID relief money that the federal government gave out a few years ago. And Londonderry got the largest state ARPA grant for its system. It's about $7.9 million for their wastewater system, but the town needs about $900,000. And that's what they were asking voters for on town meeting day. And it was an article vote. We got that in late Tuesday night. We found out the results, and Londonderry approved it. So the project's going to move ahead. And it's a really big deal for that town, which was hit hard by the flooding last year. So the folks there, it is something to look forward to, something they feel good about.
Yeah. And a lot of towns have to decide, like you were saying, before the end of this year, what they're going to do with that ARPA money. Did that deadline drive any other town meeting day votes this week?
Yeah, there were a lot of debates going on around the state about it. Highgate is using ARPA money for a wastewater project too, but because the federal money didn't cover all the work there, the town needed to ask for a bond at town meeting. And Highgate voters approved $100,000 on Tuesday by a 2-to-1 margin for their new wastewater system. In Bennington, the town's using its ARPA money to build a new senior center. And as part of that deal, they're selling the old senior center. So the town had to ask the voters for approval to do that. And Bennington also okayed the sale of the old senior center. So that project's moving ahead. And in Middlebury, they're also using ARPA money for a wastewater project. And even though the town wasn't asking for more money, they still needed a vote to get the project moving. The town had to approve the bond that they're going to use for the project. And Middlebury voters supported the plan, too, at town meeting.
Some big housing projects also on town meeting warnings. Were any of those driven by ARPA money?
There was some ARPA money tied up in that. That wastewater system we talked about in Highgate is an ARPA project, and the big reason why the town is taking that on is because they have this big plan for a 30-unit senior housing development right downtown. It's a really big project. Folks there are really excited about both the wastewater and the housing. Yeah, Vermont Public had a student reporter there, Sadie Ansana, and she caught up with Highgate Town Administrator Sharon Bosket at town meeting Tuesday. And here's what she said about the projects.
The wastewater system actually helps us protect our neighbors. Failed systems are in Highgate because of the ages of the different residents. It also allows us to do more development on this particular property. It allows us to bring in tax income to take some of the tax burden off our taxpayers.
So the Highgate voters approved that senior development project, so that's going to move on. And in St. Albans City, there was also a really big housing project on the town meeting warning. Voters there approved $11.4 million bond, and a big chunk of that is going towards what they're calling workforce housing. That's right downtown. And just lastly, the town of Richmond also had some housing projects they talked about at town meeting. But in Richmond, it was an advisory vote. There's a piece of land there that the town is using for recreation, and some housing advocates were talking about, whether it might be a place for some housing. But at town meeting, the town actually said no, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep that land for recreation. So that development is not going to move ahead.
So except for that Richmond vote, it sounds like there was a lot of support for spending big money on infrastructure and housing. What were some of the takeaways there for you, Howard, at town meeting day?
Yeah, so the first thing is that, this ARPA money, this federal money that came out during COVID or right at the end of COVID, it's really spurred a lot of development around the state. It's important to point out that towns don't have to always seek approval at town meeting. Towns got their chunk of ARPA money and they're putting into various projects. But when you need to bond for more money or when you need to seek approval for a land sale or something, that's where the town meeting votes get involved. And I think it also says a lot about, how communities feel about development within their towns. There's been a lot of talk in Montpelier about Act 250. Lawmakers haven't been able to really make some of the big changes to Act 250 that some housing advocates are looking for. But when the votes come down to town meeting, when folks are looking at their own communities and thinking about, the wastewater, the housing, they're pretty much on board for making these projects happen. I think a lot of folks know about the housing shortage, and each community is, doing what it can to try to address that.
That was Vermont Public's Howard Weiss-Tisman. Thanks for letting us know what was going on at town meeting yesterday, Howard.
You're welcome, Mary.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Peter Hirschfeld, Bob Kinzel, Lexi Krupp, Adia Golston, Michaela Lafrac, and the Community News Service program at the University of Vermont. Our executive producer is Kevin Trevelyan, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.
At a time when information continues to come at us faster and faster, sometimes you need to hit pause and rewind. NPR's Throughline takes you back in time to the source of the news stories filling your feed. Find NPR's Throughline wherever you get your podcasts.